As we dig in today, this is our last week in the fruit of the Spirit. And I don't know about you, but some of these attributes of the fruit of the Spirit have been really convicting to me, especially since I started to play softball recently again. And so the fruit of the Spirit of patience and love, man. And today we're going to talk about the last one, self-control. Man, I don't know about you, but this one's hard, y'all. Am I right? Yeah. So when we say the word control, what usually comes to mind is these negative thoughts, correct? When you hear control, it's most of the time it's this negative idea, this idea of being maybe obsessive over how things or being uptight, and you want to make sure everything is just the way you want it and it cannot go any other way besides this. It's also that same idea when you hear about somebody being controlling. I'd ask if anybody knows someone who's controlling, but we don't want a raise of hands, right? This moment, if you know somebody who's controlling, you can think about how it makes others feel maybe. You can think about how the struggle might be. It's essentially controlling the outcome through the means and the tactics of manipulation, possibly, intimidation, or even force to get their goal or the agenda met. Controlling. This idea of control doesn't seem to have the best view in our world or our culture. It's always met with negativity. But again, we've been in this passage every single week now, 9 weeks. Galatians 5, Paul, when he writes this text to the church in Galatia, what does he truly mean? And we've talked about what the Holy Spirit produces, the kind of fruit in our lives. The Spirit produces love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And there is no law against these things. Here's what's intriguing to me. Why did Paul put self-control last? I'm intrigued by it. I'm interested by it. I don't know, and I wouldn't say that there's this hierarchy or ranking system within this that Paul put out, but I find it intriguing that he puts love first and joy, but self-control is all the way at the end. I think self-control is probably one of the biggest things that people in general for years and years and years have struggled with, right? It's something that we've had to develop. We've had to learn how to be better at. It's something that is extremely difficult. And when I read this, I can't help but wonder, what is the real definition of self-control in this text and maybe even for us? I think that maybe a good place to start would be to realize that this idea of self-control, when we have this idea, it's not always this thing of being flashy or these big moments in life. Self-control can be in the little moments. Like, for example, self-control last night for me was, instead of eating the whole package of cookies, I only ate 5. Or instead of finishing off the whole carton of ice cream, I only ate a third, right? Self-control. I thought I did pretty well there. I probably should have only had 2 scoops instead of a third of the ice cream, but we're working towards better self-control, right? Self-control. It's not all these big, flashy moments. It's even in the small things. Recently, Courtney and I decided to do this little experiment. When I say Courtney and I, Courtney decided, and I was just a part of it. I showed up into the kitchen, and she had both of our boys sitting in their chairs. And I wish I could show you the video. It's absolutely hilarious and adorable because she puts our boys in the chair, and she sets up her phone so that she's recording our boys. And she gives each of them a Mike and Ike. How many of you guys like Mike and Ikes? Personal favorite, right? Love them. And she gives each of them a Mike and Ike, and then she says, and she gives them one instruction. Don't eat your candy until mommy says so. Pretty simple, right? So she sets it down, and we have our 2 boys, and so we're there, and she's like, all right, Mommy and Daddy are going to go walk away real quick, but don't eat your candy. And the youngest one already has it in his hand, and he's eyeing it. His eyes are huge, right? He's like, candy. And once again, as he's like holding it, we're about to walk away, and you see him on the camera he starts to put it in his mouth, and then all of a sudden you hear Courtney at the right moment. I said, don't eat it. Remember, not until Mommy says. And he quickly puts it down and looks, and he's like, oh, Mama's still there. And then once Courtney and I go and we go around the corner, we're out of sight. It doesn't even take my youngest 1 second to shove that candy in his mouth. It's gone. And then the best part about this whole video was his is not even done like being digested. He hasn't even swallowed it yet. And you want to know what he does? He reaches over and he grabs older brother's. And he starts to eat it. And brother reaches back and he goes, no, bro. No, bro. That's mine. And he grabs it and he sets it down at the table. And he puts his hands in his lap. But he's staring at this thing. This Mike and Ike could not grow legs and walk away if it tried. Kenny had this Mike and Ike in his sights. And we show up, we come back, and we only let it go for about a minute maybe. And sure enough, our little guy's nowhere to be found. He already swallowed that thing. He's ready for more. But Kenny, we show up, and the first thing Kenny says, Ma, I didn't eat. And we're like, good job, bud. Good job. And I think what's so interesting is in this moment, it's something so small, right? But for him, it was huge. He could do it. And he stopped brother from stealing his candy. It's in these small moments, but it's not just in the small moments, and it's not just in the big, it's in both. Because self-control is also in those moments where you choose sobriety or purity over selfish pleasures. Control. It's something that our world tries to say is always negative, and it's always a bad thing. But what if it's not? What if we come to a realization that control is actually a critical part of our lives? I know that might be kind of hard to digest, that control is actually a critical part of our lives. But hear me out on it. Have you ever walked into a situation that was out of control? Have you ever walked into a room where there's no control? As I was going to college, I decided the best place to work would be a daycare center. Yeah. And what was interesting is I was the only really, for the majority of the time, I was the only male at this daycare center. And so I would walk into these rooms, and oftentimes being the only male, I'd have to accompany a lot of the field trips and stuff because you needed a male to go on the field trip so your kids, if you go to a splash pad, they need to be able to go into the restroom to change, right? And so I'd walk into these rooms, and there's these rooms of all these different ages. And usually I worked with the older kids, the like school-age kids. You know, the kids that you could look at and be like, yo, sit down, do your homework. I don't want to hear another thing. Like, come on, Sports Center is on. You know what I'm saying? But there's moments where I had to go into the younger kid classrooms. You know those kids who like are really young and they're just learning some stuff? Those rooms that when you walked in, it was instantly felt like, at least for me, there's no control here. Like they're playing with markers, but there's no paper to be found. But the white walls look really good. Or they're playing with Play-Doh, and it's this moment where Play-Doh is supposed to stay on the table, but rather it's in their mouths, and it's in their shoes, and it's in the carpet. And you're like, what is happening here? Or my personal favorite is like, kids are supposed to be potty trained at this daycare, and they're using the restroom, but not in the restroom, if you know what I'm saying. And now we're like, now we got to find you a new set of clothes. Survival of the fittest is what I felt like. I felt like I needed war paint, my bandana. I felt like I had to strap, like I was ready to go to war. That's what it felt like for me in these little rooms because there was no control. That's what it felt like. It was these little kids running all over the place. And in these moments, I felt this deep desire to have control. And maybe for some of us, we felt a deep desire for control in certain areas in our life, when we walk into situations, when we've walked into certain places, when we walked into certain conversations, and there's been no control. And all we've longed for is control. Not to control the outcome, not to control the person, but just simply a sense that things are under control and not in chaos. And I think when we dig into this, when we dig into what the word has to say and it talks about self-control, a lot of times Paul will use the term self-control and self-discipline interchangeably. He'll talk about self-discipline and discipline of the self, discipline of your heart, discipline of your body. And the same way he talks about self-control and controlling your urges, controlling the flesh. And when he talks about controlling the flesh and the self-discipline of controlling the flesh, he's talking about the control of, he uses flesh and sinful nature interchangeably. So these moments of controlling the sin, controlling the urge to sin. And when he talks about this idea of someone who is showing self-control or self-discipline, it's not just someone who's cautious. I'll make sure we're aware of that. It's not just this moment of being just cautious and careful all the time. But rather, it's this idea as being poised in the moment or vigilant in the moment. They're awake to their surroundings. They're awake to the situations around them. They're awake to their circumstances, and they're self-conscious of themselves and others around them. And that's important. Hear me on that. Not only to themselves, but others around them as well. These are the people who bring order to the chaos. They de-escalate the tension. They're the non-anxious person and presence in the room. And oftentimes, they're the ones that are consulted when things feel overwhelming. Why? Maybe because when we model and we live and we show self-discipline and self-control, it allows us to transmit wisdom that God has given to us in those moments. They transmit wisdom. There's a whole entire group of books in the text in the Word of God that is just called the wisdom literature. And it talks oftentimes, especially Proverbs, about wisdom and self-control. Proverbs, if you ever had the chance to read it, is a very intriguing book. I personally love it. It's one of the favorites because it's this idea of almost, in some ways, of a father giving information to a son of how to live. An instruction of how to live. It's these things to not only live by, but how to also model your heart after. It's wisdom. And when we have the self-discipline and self-control in the Spirit, we model that. It speaks about that. But here's the reality that I've kind of come to understand, at least for myself, maybe for you as well, is that I don't know if I truly can possess great wisdom without mastering and learning how to guard and guide my life intentionally. How do I guard my heart? With self-control. Like Josh spoke about just a few seconds ago here, our world is bombarding us with things. If you didn't know, it's an election year. There's quite a few ads out right now, and I'm just going to break it to you. There will be more in the coming few weeks. And it's going to bombard us with all this information. Believe this, don't believe that. He said this, he said that. This, that. And I think for us, when we seek wisdom, when we seek to have wisdom in life, and we seek to show self-control in life, I think that means for us, we have to discern what voices to listen to and what voices not to. I think voices matter. I think it means we have to live deliberately and intentionally. I think it means that we have to use the Spirit of God, not just as this engine that drives us, but rather the steering wheel that guides us. We have to trust it. when I think about self-control, we can think about the cookie situation, the ice cream situation. We can think about the person who's been sober for 10 years and daily they fight that fight. But I think there's also a reality that we have to come to understand that we can develop in self-control. But in order for us to get really good at it, we have to trust the Spirit of God every step of the way. We have to believe that he knows what's best for us. We have to believe and trust his heart for us. We have to believe and trust his word and his Spirit for us. Without self-control, there's no ready, aim, fire. It's just simply ready, fire. Control, this idea of control and self-control, it aims the barrel at the bullseye. When the Spirit helps us model self-control, it gives us vision for every virtue we're called to live in under Christ. There's a purpose to every passion. There's a purpose for your passion. In 2 Timothy 1, Paul writes this to Timothy. This is what it says, verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Again, Paul uses self-control, self-discipline interchangeable. So here we are. We have a spirit of power, love, and self-control, self-discipline. And when we walk in his Spirit, when we walk into anything knowing that we have his whole power supporting us, we can walk into a situation without fear. We can walk into a situation with power. And we can walk into a situation with self-discipline because we know that the Spirit of God is with us and he will guide us throughout the process. We can walk in confidently. We can have a sound mind, a mind that is calm, a mind that is clear, and is controlled by the Spirit of God. And if we're just going to call it what it is, this idea that Paul talks about right here contradicts the mindset of the world. The mindset of the world is be frazzled, be chaotic, be uncertain, be unclear. But God calls us and he says, you can have a clear mind. You can have the power of me. Just trust it. Self-control and self-discipline hold you back when you're about to make a fatal misstep. It's the Spirit of God. When Paul wrote to him, for God has not given you a spirit of this, but rather he has given you the Spirit of himself, the Spirit with power and self-discipline. Self-discipline and self-control is the alarm when you're starting to overheat. Maybe you've been in that conversation and tensions start to rise. Maybe you've been in the moment where you're sitting down and it's that really hard discussion and you can feel your blood and all the energy in the blood start to flow to your face and you're about to burst. But self-control, self-discipline is that moment where the Spirit of God reminds us, hey, you're starting to get too hot here. Let's let it be. Let's take a step back. It's a moment where it snaps you awake when you're just sleepwalking through life, when you're just going through the motions, but God has called you to something bigger. It shows you the difference between your passion and your passions. It seeks to add value to each virtue, making sure life is invested rather than just simply being spent. I think at the root of it, self-control and self-discipline. I truly believe that it wants you to live and not just simply exist. We can go through life and we can wander through life and figure life out and we can live in his name, or we can just exist and just kind of go with the flow. I think there's a purpose behind what God has called us to. There's a purpose between the dream that God has planted in you and he's grooming in you, that he's calling you to walk with discipline in, to see it come to fruition. In our world, when we talk about self-control, when we did the little experiment with our little boys, it was this idea of, essentially we told them, right, like don't eat it until mommy and daddy come back. And it was this moment for them of, well, if I listen, what do I get, right? What do I get? What's my reward? It's all about self-control in the world is all about myself. But I think when we walk in self-control and self-discipline in the Spirit, I think it's not only about ourselves, but I think it's also about our neighbor. It's also about our friend, our family. John Piper writes that the very idea and concept of self-control and self-discipline implies that there's a battle between a divided self. The very idea of self-control implies there's a battle between a divided self. What side are you feeding? What side are we feeding? What side are we continually to give into? What side are we continually to allow to lead us? In Luke 9, Jesus gives some pretty powerful words. Words that we've talked about, but I think oftentimes, if we're just going to call it what it is, we kind of sugarcoat it and we fluff it up. Because then he says to the crowd, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways and you must take up your cross daily and follow me. If you want to be my followers, you must turn from your selfish ways and pick up your cross daily and follow me. Now, here's what's intriguing to me. He says daily. Daily. And he doesn't just say, hey, daily you must decide that you're going to be a good person. He doesn't say, daily you must decide you're going to use nice words today. Daily you must decide that you're not going to swear. Like daily he says, daily you must deny your selfish ways and pick up your cross and follow me. He also says not only daily deny yourself of your selfish ways, but daily you must pick up your cross. Not your couch, not your lazy boy, not your sofa, not your hammock, your cross. The cross in those days was designed to be the most excruciating form of torture and death known to mankind. And the Romans were really, really, really good at it, by the way. They had it down to a science. They knew where to put the spikes. They knew how heavy to make the cross. They knew not to sand it down. They knew exactly what to do in the right time frame to make it the worst pain for you. Without being too brutal, like they knew that if the average man's arm span is 6 foot, we're going to make the cross arm span about 7 foot so that we dislocate the shoulders. Hurts a little bit more, by the way. And if we put the spike here instead of here, well, it bleeds out faster. And if we break the legs, well, you can't really push yourself up to breathe air. Excruciating pain. And here Jesus is. Jesus. Let's not forget who Jesus is, right? Jesus, the Son of God, God himself, Jesus. He's done miracles. He's done all this incredible stuff. He's flipped culture on its head. And then he looks at him and he goes, it's pretty simple. If you want to be my followers, you really only got to do a few things. Deny your selfish ways. What? Oh, I'm not done. Deny your selfish ways because you're selfish, and then pick up your cross and follow me. You know that thing that's really uncomfortable, the thing that nobody wants to go to, the thing that they reserve for the most horrible of all horrible people? Yeah, pick it up and follow me. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be hard, painful even. But pick it up and follow me. There's this fierceness. There's a fierceness of self-control that you must be willing to strip away all the things in life that you're comfortable in. All the things in life that deter you from his presence, you have to strip it away. You have to show control to dig into him, to lean into him, to trust his presence. And it's the act of saying no to the sinful desires and willing to sacrifice and walk the path he lays out, even when and if it is the hardest thing you'll have to do in your life. We say no to our selfish desires. by faith in the superior power and pleasure of Christ. We don't say no on our own accord. God gives us the power to say no to the sinful desires. God gives us the power to say no to picking up that bottle again. He gives us the power to say no to hanging out with that wrong crowd again. He gives us the power to say no to opening up that certain website again. He gives us the power to say no to those sinful desires. Because here's the reality. Our world tells us that you do self-control because then you look really good, right? But if everything is done on our own power, our own accord, who gets the glory? Who gets the glory? Because when we go through it and when we exercise self-control by faith in his superior power and pleasure, Christ always gets the glory. He always gets the glory. There's this fierceness. A fierceness. Matthew 5, verse 29. This is what it says. And this is another one where Jesus here is talking about adultery. It's uncomfortable. And most of us have heard this verse. Because when he talks about it, he says, and if your eye, yes, even your good eye, causes you to lust, you must gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for the whole body to be thrown to hell. Self-control. How are we walking in the fierceness and the passion of God for ourselves? When he talks about if your eye causes you to do this, you must get rid of it. Totally get rid of it. Totally take it out of your body. Are we willing to literally remove the sinful nature of ourselves to be closer and closer to him? Every single day, are we willing to walk in his presence, in his glory, every single day? God has called us. God has called us to model for him to this world, the hope of the world. And I believe the church is that. I believe we have a purpose. I believe he has a plan. I believe that no matter what comes in this world, no matter what happens tomorrow or even today, God's in control. No matter what sinful things may come my way right after this, whatever might come your way right after this, he asks you in his power, in his spirit, to strip off the things of this world and to dive into him. The book of Titus is this small, short little book. But what's interesting to me is that the book of Titus is written, and in these moments that it was written, it was threatened by the culture who didn't care about God. The book of Titus is written in a moment in time where the culture did not care about God. And there were even false teachers, by the way, false teachers in the day, and false ideas of who God was and who God wasn't that were being taught to the people. And Titus writes this book. He writes this book, and as Titus is sharing about this, he says, for the grace of God has been revealed, bringing salvation to all people. And we are instructed to turn from God, from godless living and sinful pleasures. We should live in this evil world with wisdom, righteousness, and devotion to God while we look forward with hope that our wonderful day when the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, will be revealed. He gave his life to free us from every kind of sin, cleanse us, and to make us his own people, totally committed to doing good deeds. In a moment that was plagued by people who were threatened by God, a world that was threatened by God, we have comfort knowing that God has fought for us. And each and every day when we desire self-control, when we lean into him, it's a fight for our faith. I heard it once that self-control is essentially the rebar for our Christian faith and our Christian walk. To deny ourselves of the selfish desires, but rather to walk in faith and in his presence and receive his strength daily, his spirit daily, and his power to overcome anything that life can throw at us. But we only can do that through him and in his spirit. Before we started service today, we gathered. And I fully shared that, I just feel drained. And I know that's a vulnerable thing for me to say. That's a risky thing even to say. I just feel drained. These past few weeks, it's been attack after attack after attack. I feel drained. And in my heart, I feel like I'm probably not the only one. I'm probably not the only one that feels when you wake up in the morning, you don't even know if you have enough to make it through the day. And I don't know why, but I think sometimes when we feel that way, when we feel so drained and just so empty, we also let this idea of hopelessness creep in. And we get trapped by it. But if I've learned anything, if I've heard anything in talking with other people, other believers, and the encouragement from them, there's comfort knowing that my God walked through every single thing that I did. There's comfort when I read about Jesus. He got tired. One of my favorite quotes of all time, is like, Jesus took naps. Naps are holy. Rest is holy. Go get some. Like, I love that. I don't nap that well, but like, I can rest. And maybe for some of us, we need to show the self-control of stripping away things in our schedule this week to have the moment of rest. To say, God, I just need to be with you. Whatever that looks like for you. Maybe that's reading a book. Maybe that's going to your bed and sleeping. Maybe that's going to your bed and sleeping for 5 hours for a nap. I don't understand a nap that is 5 hours long, but I know people who do it. I don't get it. But, so like there's this moment, get some rest, be with him, show some self-control this week, and just be with him. We have the temptation to load everything into our schedules. Be so busy from sun up to sundown that we forget the moments of God just wants to sit and be with us and just say, my child, I want to hear all about your day today. I want to hear about your heart. My child, can you tell me about your soul? What is your soul longing for? What is your soul desiring? What is your soul just deeply crying out today? I want to hear it. And then he also wants to say, my child, can I just fill you back up with my spirit, my presence, with my grace, my love, my mercy? Whatever you need, can I give it to you? Because I'm here. So during this next song, here's what I want to encourage us to do. Whatever it looks like for you, whatever posture, whatever way, just take these next few moments of this song to just simply let God speak and fill you. Let him speak deeply to your heart. Let him speak deeply to your spirit and to your core. Maybe for some of us, we've been longing to hear his voice of just whisper something. Would he speak deeply to you if we just open up the space in the moment to do so? I want to invite you to take a moment. Invite you to take a time, just a hot second today, to let him speak directly into you in whatever you're longing for today.